Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 16 of Shakin Hands. I'm your host, Jack Moran. You can find me on Instagram at Blue Collar Kid. That is Blue Collar KEHD. Today on the podcast, we have Jose Goldner. This is his second episode. What's going on, Jose?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well. So last time we did the podcast, I kind of went into asking questions about you as an entrepreneur. This time I want to talk more about your expertise. You have a background in education, psychology. So I want to talk a little bit about what are the fundamental principles and drivers that create an entrepreneur. You coach and mentor a lot of entrepreneurs, so you've gotten to see what are the common denominators between these entrepreneurs. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So what do you think is the commonality between all entrepreneurs?
Well, I think that they all had parents, mother, father together, or a mother or a father that influenced them to be intrinsically motivated with turning an idea into a business.
Okay, so what is an entrepreneur? Let's start with that, actually. Cool. How do you define an entrepreneur?
So I define an entrepreneur as somebody that has an idea or a problem they want to solve, and they turn it into a business.
Okay, and so what makes a good entrepreneur? What are the personality traits that they have that that make them successful?
I think you have to have a positive belief system. So you have to believe in yourself. So you had to have grown up with a pretty solid self-esteem. So that comes from parents. If you have parents that criticize you as a child, chances are you're not going to have a healthy self-esteem. But if you had parents that encouraged you and created a fertile ground for you to have positive self-esteem, then that's going to give you the confidence to take risks. So that's an important part of becoming an entrepreneur.
So why is risk-taking an important trait?
Well, risk is...
Or a big aspect.
Yeah, risk is all over the spectrum. I mean, you can take somebody that considers low risk, it could be very high risk for somebody else. And so risk-taking, from the moment you're a child and you're running around the house, you could have a parent that chases after you and goes, be careful here, be careful there. Or you could have a parent that goes, you know what, they're going to fall. They're going to come to me. And I'm going to say, well, that's what's going to happen if you run around the house like that. So parenting can influence a child from the minute they're born all the way through they leave the house by gauging risk and what that is.
So you keep talking about you keep mentioning parents and the importance of that. And for someone who doesn't have the context of the impact that has, why does your experiences as a childhood affect your reality as an adult? What is the actual process? What's happening there?
Yeah, there's a saying that says, show me a successful adult and I will show you a successful child. So I think that the foundation, if you don't have the foundation of that self-confidence and that positive belief system, then you're not going to have strong convictions about creating something that hasn't ever been created before. You need a certain personality to say, you know what, I have the intelligence, I have the positive belief system, I have the risk tolerance to go out and do something that's never been done before.
So what does a positive belief system look like?
So a positive belief system is basically you have an idea, and I'm going to give you an example. You have an idea and you say, you know what, that's a very valid idea. It's a valuable idea. And you're going to have people that say, that's a terrible idea, right? And so what makes you think and endure other people's opinions and endure and say, you know what, I do have a positive idea, and stick to those convictions? In the highs and the lows and the roller coaster ride of being an entrepreneur, you're always going to be tempted by that self-doubt. And so having a structure, mental structure of you know what, I'm going to endure and I'm going to be resilient with my idea is key.
So where do you think the disconnect is? Because there's so many people these days that have very low self-belief, low self-esteem, and don't have the makeup of an entrepreneur. Do you think it's something coming from like mostly parental supervision, or it's coming from the like educational system? Like, where's the disconnect that's like causing all these people to not have confidence in themselves?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, because a lot of people attribute their professional life and their patterns of success. They say, you know, if you go to high school and you go to college and university, you're going to be successful. Now, your chances of making money and surviving, etc., are greater when you have an educational system. That's for sure. But entrepreneurs, they don't get all of that value necessarily from education, formal education. They start getting it in the home. And so that is, let's call it a parallel structure. You have a structure in the home and you have a structure in formal education. But hands down, every entrepreneur that I've had mentorees study, they had a structure that was far more powerful in the home than it was in formal education. Let's take Steve Jobs. He dropped out of college. Let's take Warren Buffett. His parents were having him stock supermarket shelves when he was a child. Let's take Ted Turner. The father taught him work ethic from a very young age, mowing lawns, working with a billboard company. They all have a structure at home that showed them work ethic, that showed them discipline, risk-taking, habits, consistency. And so that's generally a sign that that you're going to go into that route.
So I think like more often than not, people don't have that perfect structure. And they do have these, like right now, have a lot of these self-esteem issues. How can somebody get away from these like limiting beliefs? First of all, become aware of those limitations that they have. How do they become aware of the limitations that they have and then overcome them?
So that's a commitment. It's a very big commitment. And it's actually a very scary commitment, because when you start to analyze yourself and look in the mirror, so to speak, figuratively speaking, you look in the mirror, it's really hard to kind of admit your weaknesses. It's scary, because when you self-reflect, you go, oh my God, look at all the things that I have to commit to working on, and how do I overcome them? So you don't just magically get rid of those problems, because a lot of them, I call them negative anchors. You could be dragging an anchor that is a traumatic event that happened in your childhood. Maybe you were bullied. Maybe you had a father that was overcritical of everything you did. And so as you get older, you're dragging those negative anchors into your adult life. You're self-doubting yourself, and you wake up and you feel a little bit depressed. And when somebody criticizes you, you succumb to it, or you're a people pleaser, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to heal from the past of being criticized as a child. So I call it running from the ghost, right? Catch me if you can. You know, that when the detective goes to him on the way to the plane, and he could get away from the FBI job and start doing his criminal activity. He goes, hey, look, turn around, nobody's chasing you. So that is looking deep into those anchors, being aware of it, and then you have to read about strategies of how to overcome those limitations. That's key. You have to have a plan. It's almost like the way you look at a business. You got to look at yourself and go, what is my strategy to get out of this? What are the things that are going to help me to overcome these weaknesses? And so you've got to do a lot of pattern interruption, they call it, when you're in that negative thought process. How do you snap out of it? How do you replace it with a positive thought? And how do you overcome it?
Do you have any practices that like you utilize that you think are beneficial?
Well, I love reading history. And so I think that that some of the greatest strategies to overcome mental weaknesses came from wars, came from warriors. Before they went to war, they would develop chants, and they would develop these chants that made them go into a trance, because they were off to war in a super high-risk situation where the chances of getting killed were very high. So you're not dealing with a logical thought pattern. So what you would do is you'd get into a trance so that you would come out of that logic and it would be 100% emotional. So the emotion can drive logic, right? Or the logic can drive the emotion, one or the other. So using images, using sounds, using your senses to drive your consciousness into a realm that you want to be in is a strategy that is very effective.
What would you say to me, like, if I was someone who was trying to get over a negative belief system where I felt like I couldn't be successful because I saw my parents fail time and time again? Like, where would I start?
Well, I would start with books that can help you to diagnose yourself. And so I have an array of different books where they go into how do you diagnose when you have a problem. And it's as simple as getting up in the morning and understanding, like, what's my outlook on life? Am I grateful? Am I immediately engaging in positive thought patterns? Or do I have negative thought patterns? Or do I have 70% positive thought patterns and 30% negative? And when does that negative come in, right? Am I an impossibility thinker or am I a possibility thinker? So that it's as simple as that. Like I talk about a lot with young children that happiness is a discipline. Being happy is a discipline. Why? Because you've got to wake up every single day and make it the greatest day of your entire life. That's how I try and live my life.
Are there like specific traits or specific like red flags that you see in a lot of people that they're exerting or exemplifying or they're performing that you are like, this is an issue?
Well,
like an internal negative self-talk.
I'm a little bit more trained, I guess, into recognizing negative belief systems. And so I pay attention to language a lot as a writer and a former literature teacher. I could sit and watch a movie and instead of visually having it affect me, I actually listen to the words and I read a movie versus see a movie. So when I'm having a conversation with somebody, I'm very aware of the words that they're using. So I recognize language patterns that are really mindset patterns and their mindset. So I can, the negative words that they use to refer to themselves, to refer to others, or they jump out at me a lot faster because I'm very aware of the negative patterns. Like somebody that says, oh, I'm so frustrated. Oh, I'm dead if I don't do this. Or, God, this is so hard. And this is happening in the economy and it's terrible for my business. And so once you recognize those patterns, then they're going to jump out at you more and more. And so it's not just about recognizing it internally for yourself, but in other people as well.
Why is that profound, like that they're using that language? They may say like, okay, whatever, I speak negatively, but I still get to work and go to work every single day. And like, why is that language, why is that very important?
Well, it's very important because if you have a negative internal dialogue, sooner or later you're going to externalize it.
How does that happen? That's like what I'm trying to get to here.
So I wake up in the morning and I'm frustrated and I've got a million problems happening, and I go to my office and I'm a leader. I'm the owner of a business. And all of a sudden I'm letting those negative things affect me, and I'm not looking at it how to positively get out of those challenges, I'm looking at it and dwelling on the negative. So what I'm going to communicate to people is not what I'm necessarily saying, it's what I'm feeling, right? So even though I can fake it and say, guys, we're going to get over these challenges, that's irrelevant, because deep down inside, I'm insecure. I'm feeling that it's a negative thing that's going to affect my business, right? So that fear is going to be communicated to the people around me. So you can't convince people that you're going to get over a challenge unless you yourself are convinced. So those negative patterns are going to come out. So the first thing about being a true leader is being true to yourself. And so you've got to admit, it's better to admit the weakness than to hide the weakness, because the weakness will come out in your language and the way you carry yourself. So true strength comes from admitting your weaknesses and your mental challenges and all of those things, because you've got to get over them yourselves. And showing people how you get over those weaknesses is also something very, very powerful in leadership.
So I have a question, and this is like way off track, but I just thought of it. I think it'll be interesting. When I first met you, you would talk about the Monroe Institute and how beneficial it was to your life. And I always found it super fascinating, like the stories that you told about going there. And then I went and I found it pretty beneficial, and like how it helped me get over limiting beliefs in their whole process. But what was like the story of that place? Like, how'd you go there, and what was the experience that you had there? I want to talk about this place a little bit.
Well, the Monroe Institute has a lot of stories. So I'll just tell one story.
How'd you end up there?
So the Monroe Institute was a place where some of the people in the U.S. government were going to, because they were interested in a subject called remote viewing, and this is going to sound a little crazy, and I'm a very pragmatic guy, so I was like, I don't believe in any of this. But I had a friend of mine that said, you need to go. I'm going to pay for the flight. I'm going to pay for the things. And he actually paid for it without me even knowing. And so I literally got on a plane. And I said, well, I'm just going to go to this institute and like sleep, because you're doing meditation for 6-7 hours a day. But anyway, this subject interested me, that in the 1960s, they had American, Russian, and Chinese spies engaging in these meditative trances where they would do what they called remote viewing, where you came out of your body and you traveled to a different place and you explored different locations. And there was an experiment by the CIA called Stargate. It's actually on Wikipedia. And there was a gentleman that I know, and he was one of the guys that traveled. And in the 80s, there was Iran had U.S. hostages. And this guy was the guy that traveled and went into the room where they had the hostages and identified each one of them.
Is that Joe McMoneagle?
Joe McMoneagle, yeah. So there's books that he's written about it. I actually met him at the Monroe. And so that was kind of interesting to me conceptually. Not that I was like, oh, wow, I believe in this, until I understand kind of the methodology of what he was trying to do to do this traveling. So there is very interesting things that can come out of deep meditation. I'm not a meditation kind of person. I get up in the morning, I'm going 150 miles an hour, but I did learn the discipline of cleaning your mind of things and being very purposeful about what goes into your mind on a daily basis, and making sure that your thoughts are completely productive and you block out all the noise and anything that's irrelevant, including people that you meet. Like now I've become more aware after the Monroe Institute, like, okay, I don't want to be around this person because it's not productive. Or I want to do business with this person because that's going to be very productive. I'm able to really like tune in on my intuition without having external noise affect my perceptions. That's what the Monroe Institute taught me. And so when you're by yourself for so long, it was a week meditation for 6-7 hours at a time. What happens is the external noise, the news, people talking to you, opinions, and this and that. Imagine all that noise slowly dissipating and fading. And all you're left with, which is actually pretty scary too, is your own thought without any external noise. So when you have that, just your own thoughts in that deep meditative state, it's amazing how it's like drinking a little vial of a very powerful, potent medicine that is your intuition. And it's almost like being able to see the future of like, oh my God, this is where I'm making wrong decisions. You analyze your life and you see ahead of yourself. And it changed me in the way of like, I came out of it and I go, this is going to be my priority changes from now on. Which I feel like I've been pretty good at because, I prioritize being a father a lot and certain things that are non-negotiables, I call them. I had that structure, but after the Monroe, I was really able to move in a way that was instant to instant discipline versus kind of a longer term view. Because if you focus on the now, you focus on the discipline, and you remove the compulsive thinking, it's amazing the amount of purpose you can have in everything you say and everything you do.
And so obviously it was a very profound experience for me as well. And my takeaways from it were essentially I don't know if you just mentioned this, but they use hemispheric synchronization, which Bob Monroe figured out. What he was essentially trying to do was emulate he was trying to do it for business. There was no spiritual aspect to him starting the Monroe Institute. He wanted to study these people with these beliefs, or not beliefs, these skills or abilities, like monks or deep meditators. And what he was doing was recording their brainwave states when they were in these deep meditations where they were highly productive and doing these amazing feats, and see that, okay, if we can record their brainwave state, and their brain is functioning at 8 megahertz in this state, and we play that brainwave state back to someone, will they jump right into that state? And they found out that no, that wasn't the case, because the frequency was so low, the human ear couldn't hear it. So what he figured out was that, say they were trying to achieve 8 megahertz frequency, if they played 100 megahertz in one ear and 108 in the other ear, the brain would synthesize the difference, would tune the two frequencies together and synthesize the difference, which was that 8 megahertz, and you would go into that delta or gamma or whatever it is, beta state, a lot quicker and get into these meditative states. And what happens when you're in these meditative states is our bodies are just essentially data absorbing machines. Like the external world, we see a wall and I see this microphone, but really it's just atoms and electrons and neutrons and a whole lot of empty space and a lot of energy. And we interpret that into a hallucinated picture. But there's a lot more data out there than we think. It's just quieting your mind and blocking out the distractions enough to absorb from that data. So how Joe McMoneagle, who was also there when I was there, as you said, one of the best remote viewers of all time, explained it to me, was we fundamentally, and I'm going to bring this back into business in a second, we fundamentally as humans have intuition. And how he said that, how he models that is when humans were, the early civilization of humans, we were in tribes, right? Which were essentially large families, hunter-gatherer groups. And at the top of these tribes was a shaman. And that shaman was the guy that would say hey, don't go in this cave because there's danger, or hunt in this field today because I think there's going to be mammoth there or whatever. So he was utilizing his intuition to predict what would be successful for his tribe. And obviously the guys that were good at it were their families and their tribes were succeeding. They weren't going into the cave with the danger, and they were having success hunting. And so that trait was evolving in humans. This intuition, this ability to, essentially, you're predicting the future. But it's not like, it sounds like woo, but really you're just utilizing this like ability that you have to grab external data from the outside world and use that to your advantage. And some people are just more in tune with it than others. So what I wanted to get back to is like, and that's what I learned at Monroe, is like getting more in tune with my intuition, and people process it differently. But why is intuition like so important in entrepreneurship and business?
Well, I think
that was a huge tangent, but
yeah, no, I think, and I want to pull it back to educational systems as well, because I think we're losing some of that in education. And I'm really happy to see institutions now going into entrepreneurship, even in early education, where it should be taught. We should bring what happens in the home into the schools, which is Maria Montessori, right? The Montessori system. But we should bring those. I think it's a huge advantage for a school that brings in those entrepreneurship traits that are happening in the home, bring them to the school. That's a huge leap in educational systems. I think that's going to happen. But so to answer your question is, what happens in the home is that, and the common denominator between successful entrepreneurs in that home environment is they are taught how imagination becomes reality, right? And so you imagine going to the refrigerator to get a glass of water, and you imagine pouring from the jar the glass of water. You imagine the condensation on your hand. You imagine the water running between your fingers. You imagine lifting the glass, lifting it to your mouth, right? Now, you visualize that, correct?
When I'm thirsty.
Yeah, when you're thirsty. Yeah. Did you visualize what I just said?
100%.
Okay. So before you do it with your mind, right? Before you do it physically, you did it with your mind. So that's essentially what, the more intricate and complexity you have in developing your imagination, the more the chances are you're going to turn it into reality. But that imagination, by the way, is based on some sort of reality, right? So it's a complete circle. But the more, like with my children,
yeah, those thoughts don't just come from nowhere.
No, they come from some sort of reality, some sort of memory. And so when I speak to my children, I'm always trying to get them to develop the imagination, to run with it. So one of the things you want to do as a parent is to visualize. And visualizing to me is the sister of meditation, right? Mm-hmm. And so all of these things, visualizing and meditating, and those are patterns that we can develop in our children and in ourselves, where we use the imagination to move steps ahead. The chess game. Let's move 16 moves ahead. Tomorrow I'm going to move 20 more moves ahead. So a skill set that you want as an entrepreneur is having a larger and larger, everyday growing, and a broad set of considerations to make a decision. That's essentially a skill set that you want to develop, and you want to get momentum in that, because it's all about that momentum that drives, right, you to create that reality you want to create. And momentum, by the way, is also a leadership trait. People want to follow people that have momentum. And so you don't want to be, if you go in a direction and you stop, and then you go in another direction and you stop, and you go in another direction and you stop, it's pretty difficult to follow you. But if you're going in one direction and you're getting momentum, right, people will stand behind you and they will go in that direction, because they will understand that the speed, right, is directly proportional to that intensity of reaching success, right? As in, slowness and stopping and starting is directly proportional to indecision, not following through, and the chances of not, creating that reality through imagination dwindles down.
So I have a kind of closing question here before we wrap it up. What question do you think every person watching this right now should ask themselves right now?
Well,
Does that make sense what I'm saying? What would be a good question for someone to ask themselves right now?
I always ask people, why do you think that you're an entrepreneur? That's
not just like I want to go even deeper than that. Not just for entrepreneurs, like, because a lot of the people watching this are like, haven't even made the leap into entrepreneurship yet. I'm talking about someone who like is still trying to figure themselves out. Like, a lot of our audience is like people in college that haven't even figured out what their career is yet. Like, what is something that someone can ask themselves to like get a better awareness of their life, where they're going, and like.
I can answer that with a question I ask myself.
Yeah.
I don't often ask certain questions because they can be incredibly threatening to people. But I always ask myself, why am I not living my dream life every day? That's what I ask myself every day. Like, every day, my goal is to live a dream life daily. And if I'm not doing that, I'm cheating myself, because one day it's going to be my last day. So why not pretend as if every day is your last day? And what would you do if it was your last day? That way, when that last day does arrive, you're like, you know what? I left nothing on the table. I did it all.
Do you think it's possible for everyone to live their dream life every single day?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Then isn't it irrational for people not to be doing that?
Oh, I wouldn't say it's irrational, because that's very subjective.
So then why are people not living their dream life every single day? Why are people?
Well, I think it's
why are people suffering?
You have to educate yourself on yourself, self-knowledge. And a lot of us are driven by other people. We're driven by other people's thoughts of what happiness should be, what marriage should be, what love is, what beauty is, what truth is, what democracy, all these abstractions, right? I can go over and over and over them, but what do they really mean to us? Is it the same definition of truth and beauty that you have that I'm going to have? No. So that's where institutions like marriage and democracy, all these things break down, because everybody has a different definition. And unless we're committed to defining these abstractions, then we're not living truthfully.
Well, what do you mean, like, people have different definitions of democracy?
Well, is democracy going to war?
No, probably not.
Right? I mean, I think that there's a question of, like, is democracy that the U.S. goes into $33 trillion in debt without really anybody, the mass population, having a say in it? Going to war, in Ukraine, and going to war in all these different places. Did you have a choice in that? Do you think the majority of the U.S. people have a choice in it? That's a question, right? I'm not giving you an answer, but there's a lot of things that if you don't practice it, are we really living in democracy?
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, that's pretty much all I got for you today. I don't know if you have any closing comments for entrepreneurs. What would be your last? Well,
I think one of the things that I always talk about is when you're an entrepreneur. It's not something that you decide, like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. You're kind of born with it. But if you don't have the structure, or you want to be an entrepreneur, but you know that you didn't really have the scaffolding and the building, there for you, and you want to do it, I'm an optimist. So I believe that you can read enough books, and you can, if you have the work ethic and you have the discipline, the day-to-day discipline, you can do it. And I think that, like, athletes, I think I'm biased because I was an athlete. My kids are athletes. I think they have the structure to be great entrepreneurs, because they go to training every single day. They have discipline. They do the same thing over and over again, and they wait for that moment to excel. They train for those moments to excel. And on the journey, They're always creating these milestones of success. And I think that's a trait of great entrepreneurs, creating the milestones daily of success. And that's going to take you to the long-term success. But you got to enjoy the journey. And I think professional athletes that are training every single day, they develop these habits. They develop the mindset. They develop the discipline. They have the characteristics of a great entrepreneur.
All right, Jose. Well, that was some super great insight. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, that concludes this episode of Shakin' Hands. I'm your host, Jack Moran. You can find me on Instagram at Blue Collar Kid. That is Blue Collar KEHD. If you like today's episode, please subscribe and tune in next time for some more great conversations and guests. Have a good one.